Welcome to the Business Talk, a global podcast series that highlights distinguished faculty members and their impactful scholarly contributions. I am Deepak, your host from India. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Hector Amaya as our distinguished guest on today's podcast episode. Before we get started, let me introduce the guest for today's episode. Dr. Hector Amaya is a professor of communication at University of Southern California, Annenberg, where his scholarship sits at the intersection of media, politics, and citizenship across the Americas. An influential voice in critical media studies, he has written three books and numerous articles that probe globalization, Latin American media, immigration, and Latinx media and cultural politics. His forthcoming book, Trafficking, Narco-Culture in Mexico and the United States, published by Duke University Press, investigates how drug-related violence and digital media reshape public life in both Mexico and the United States. Earlier in Citizenship Express Access, Latinas, Media, and the Nation published by NYU Press, Dr. Amaya explored how post-9/11 political discourse and media help normalize anti-Latino nativism in the United States. His first book, Screening Cuba, Film Criticism as Political Performance During the Cold War, offered a comparative account of Cuban film reception, cultural criticism, and citizenship in Cuba and the US from the 1960s through the mid-1980s. Professor Amaya has played a major leadership role in this field, serving as chair of the Latino Communication Studies Division and La Raza Caux of the National Communication Association, as well as chair of the Latino Caux of the Society of Cinema and Media Studies. His standing as a scholar was further recognized through the membership in the School of Social Science at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton in 2018. Born and raised in Mexico, Professor Amaya began his academic journey at the Metropolitan Autonomous University in Mexico City. He later earned advanced degrees from the University of Calgary and the University of Texas at Austin. And before joining USC Annenberg, he was a professor of media studies at the University of Virginia. In today's episode, we are truly privileged to sit down with Dr. Hector Amaya, who takes us on a fascinating journey deep into the heart of his compelling new book, The Economy of Anonymity, Power in the Age of Identification. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hector Amaya to the conversation. Professor Amaya, your gracious acceptance of our invitation means a great deal to us, and it is with an immense honor and delight that we welcome you to Business Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor, your book argues that anonymity is a powerful lens to understand society, humanity, and power today. What was the original puzzle or moment that convinced you anonymity deserved a full-length theoretical treatment separate from the more familiar debates on privacy and surveillance?
Thank you, Deepak, for such a kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be here. It is an honor to chat with you and with your community of listeners from sunny Los Angeles. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to me. And thank you for this question, by the way. I think it is not obvious why something that we take for granted as anonymity, would merit a full book, but I began to be fascinated with the issue of anonymity in my previous book when I was writing Trafficking, the book you mentioned, Narcoculture in Mexico and the United States. In that book, I was dealing with a case, among other cases. One of the cases was the anonymous blogosphere. In Mexico, as you probably are aware, there has been a lot of organized violence, organized crime violence. Since 2007, we have seen the rise of drug violence and cartel violence escalate enormously. And the cartels began targeting journalists at the time, and Mexico has since suffered from the pain not only of the violence, but also of having the institutions of journalism be self-censored, by the violence of the cartels, because cartels would threaten and attack and sometimes kill actually journalists who were publishing things about them. And so a group of Mexican citizens used anonymous blogs in order to fill up the gap actually left by the citizens, by the journalists themselves. And so they began creating anonymous blogs that would uh, publish articles, but also videos and photos of the violence in Mexico. And one of the bloggers got my attention. It was one of the most famous and a blog with huge circulation in Mexico for several years. The blog is called El Blog del Narco. And the blogger uses pseudonym Lucy. And I learned a lot about Lucy while doing my research, and it really puzzled me that she and the other anonymous bloggers would dare to use anonymity as a protection against the cartels and make enemies out of the cartels. And it seemed to me like such a risky endeavor. And eventually, Lucy was found out by the cartels, and she had to run from Mexico. And the last I learned from her, she was in Spain, and eventually she disappeared. And her story for me was a story both of the tragedy of our public lives, but also of the tragedy of the tragedies that are made possible by our understandings and our hopes on anonymity. She hid behind a digital anonymity for while she lasted as a blogger, but eventually, the cartels had the technical means to find her, and she was found, and she perhaps paid the consequences. Since then, I began obsessed with the question of anonymity, and while learning when as a professor, one has to read a lot before one writes a single word. And those cases forced me to learn the literatures of anonymity in several disciplines. It's not only in the discipline of communication. And one of the things that surprised me at the time was that most scholarship on anonymity was interested more on the effects of anonymity than on anonymity itself. So those who were interested, for instance, on freedom of speech would think about anonymity and examples like the one that I just mentioned, Lucy's example. But those who were interested on the rise of unethical behavior like trolling on the web would be interested also in anonymity, and they would think that anonymity was bad for society. Some thought that was good, some thought that was bad, but everybody was interested mostly on the effects of anonymity and not necessarily on anonymity. That made me unhappy. It made me feel that anonymity deserved a closer inspection. And as you mentioned in your question, I dedicated a whole book to explore the issue of anonymity. What is anonymity? How does affect our lives as individuals? How does it affect our lives as citizens? And what role does it play in the power structures that define us?
Professor, much of the current discourse focuses on surveillance, datafication, and privacy, while anonymity has been relatively neglected. Conceptually, how do you distinguish anonymity from privacy? And what do we miss analytically when we collapse the two?
Thank you, Deepak. That's also a great question. And one of the first things that I have to do when I'm giving talks about this book, by the way, is to separate privacy from anonymity. They seem similar, and they are very different, however, and I have to remind everybody that while privacy has received plenty of analytic scrutiny, there are great books written on privacy. Um, Relatively little has been written on anonymity. And it puzzles me, by the way. It still puzzles me today. I think for every book on privacy, every book on anonymity, there are 10 books on privacy. And and what puzzles me is the fact that they are different things. Okay, privacy is we use privacy when you want your identity and your activity to be hidden from public view, both identity and your activity are hidden from public view. But in anonymity is a technique that we use when you want your identity to be hidden, but your activity or speech to be open and in the public and the public's eyes. So anonymity is a type of publicity. It's a type of action in public where the action, the activity is made visible to all, but not your identity. And so when Jane Austen, for instance, wanted to publish her books anonymously in the 19th century, she wanted her books to be read by people. She wanted her activity of writer, the outcome of her activity as a writer to be seen by everybody, but she wanted her identity to be withheld. And privacy is different. In privacy, actually, you want also your activity to be hidden. And so I have to remind people sometimes that, sometimes it's confusing to separate them because they both imply the hiding identities. But in reality, actually, in one is about public activities and public speeches while hiding identities. So for me, anonymity is very important to understand the public sphere, to understand our political lives, to understand our lives, the lives of the social. Privacy is about something else, very important, but about something else. And surprisingly, when we start, when those of us who study publicity or public sphere theory in general, which is one of my areas of specialization, we note that in Athens, the difference between privacy and public was the difference between the market and the home. The home was the sphere of privacy behind walls, but the market was the sphere of the public, was the space of publicity. It was open to everybody. And so that's the main difference that I see, and the one that is very important. And I think for anybody who is interested in the social and in politics, the most important of the two is anonymity, not privacy.
Professor, the title introduces the idea of an economy of anonymity in a modernity defined by computation. When you speak of an economy here, what are the key resources, transactions, or currencies at play? And who are the main beneficiaries and losers in this economy?
Thank you. I use the term economy because I'm interested in the personal and institutional uses of anonymity and on how anonymity is, in a sense, uh, distributed in such a way that actually it's given, some people are given access to it and some people are not given access to it. Um, who is required to use it, who is not required to use it. So I'm interested in particular in the rules of distribution, and I also believe that anonymity is a resource because anonymity is always about power. Anonymity is a technique that disrupts power structures. It's a disrupting technique. It's a disrupting technique. And because of this, it's a resource. This is a very important resource if you think about it. An individual who uses anonymity to publish controversial ideas, for instance, it is disrupting the social norms of the time. Again, Jane Austen, when she published her novels anonymously in the 19th century, she did it to disrupt the gender and social conventions of the time. For her, it was a resource, an important resource, and perhaps one uniquely powerful resource for her views, her ideas, and her artistic expression to be in the public. Now, but the anonymity is not simply a resource for the people. Anonymity is also a resource for institutions. And institutions use it all the time in order for their own ends. For instance, when a democracy uses the secret anonymous ballot as the center of their political system, they are both making sure that the vote is done in a way that protects the citizenry because it makes possible for a vote to be without retaliation, where like in a moment where where political power rests in people who have low scruples or without scruples, they may actually retaliate against those who vote against them. Now, the anonymous vote secures that, secures the vote, and at the same time brings legitimacy to that democratic process. For the institutions that actually depend on the anonymous vote actually is to their own ends. There are other contexts in which anonymity is institutionally used for their own ends. And in all of these cases, what matters about anonymity is who uses it. And whoever uses anonymity takes some benefit from anonymity. This does not mean that those who use it will be anonymous themselves, because institutions impose anonymity on others as well. And when institutions impose anonymity on others, it's for the benefit of institutions, and sometimes for the detriment of those who actually have to be anonymized. And so when I use economy, in this case, I mean to think about distribution, who has access to anonymity, who doesn't have access to anonymity. And the fact that you rightly noticed anonymity is a resource. It's a resource that it is used by some to their benefit.
Professor, you show that anonymity can feel like radical freedom in some contexts and like powerlessness or subjugation in others. Could you walk us through a concrete example of each and explain what changes in the social or institutional settings that flip anonymity from empowering to disempowering?
Thank you. And I think the one of the things that I learned while writing the book is that um, the examples of anonymity that were typically covered by the literatures were relatively narrow too. If anonymity is the disconnection an individual has from their identifiers, that is, for instance, in my case, if I were to do what I'm doing right now, but instead of presenting myself to you and your listeners as Hector Amaya, which is my name, I told you that my name is Rodrigo Perez, I am using anonymity to do my presentation. Okay. I am anonymizing myself. I'm disconnecting myself from my real identifier, which is Hector Amaya. Anonymity is the disconnection of an individual from their identifiers. Now, when this disconnection is initiated by a social agent, like again, Jane Austen, for instance, when she publishes her work anonymously, um, she is doing this in order to experience the freedom of publication that she deserves. When Lucy was doing the same in the Mexican blogosphere, when Lucy was publishing El Blog del Narco anonymously, she was exercising her freedom of speech. The literatures on anonymity are very interested in cases like this. But if you think about the fact that anonymity is the disconnection of an individual from their identifier, I can find the disconnection of an individual from their identifiers in many other instances. And so anonymizing happens in more spaces than those conventionally covered by the literatures. For me, one that actually came to mind as soon as I began to think about anonymity more deeply was slavery. During slavery, one of the first things that those who kidnap Africans from Africa did was to take away their names, rename them with their own names, with the names that they chose, and use this process of unnaming and renaming as a process of starting the process of making them chattel, owner, making them things that were less than human. And so when I began to see anonymizing in slavery, later I saw it in coverture as well. In coverture, for instance, when a woman takes the husband's name, she is unnamed and renamed in the process of becoming a subject to the man. When I saw these as cases of anonymity and anonymizing, I began to understand that anonymity was actually also part of the power structures of subjugation. In the book, I cover cases of immigration, coloniality, colonialism, and gender, and issues of sexual minorities as well. In all of these cases, I look at how is it that disconnecting oneself from our identifiers can really make us subjects or subhuman or shaped in a way that actually takes away our freedoms. So I believe one of the innovations of the book then is to expand our understanding of anonymity and to see cases that were typically not covered by the literatures as in cases of anonymizing, important cases of anonymizing.
Professor, the book insists that anonymity is not only a digital phenomenon, it also appears in crowds, protests, and urban life. How do you see continuities and breaks between old forms of anonymity, like the crowd, and new forms of enabled by platforms, algorithms, and data infrastructures?
Anonymity has been part of social life always, and it is in all aspects of social life, one has the possibility of being anonymous. I like to think of anonymity in at least three different ways. One of them is agentic anonymity, when anonymity is initiated by an individual. Again, like Lucy initiated her anonymity process. But I like to think also about the anonymizing that happens in urban spaces where one is in the middle of a crowd and one suddenly feels anonymous because one is anonymous and one behaves differently. That feeling of being in a crowd sometimes makes us feel free. Sometimes it makes us feel invisible. Invisible is not a fun feeling, by the way. Invisible can feel very terrible. But definitely that those experiences of being in a crowd are very particular, and they relate to that feelings generated by anonymity. The digital realm is, to me, super fascinating because on the one hand, the digital realm seems to be designed for anonymity. We use anonymity all the time. We use pseudonyms, we create fake email addresses in order to participate in certain, perhaps, groups, interest chat groups. We create nicknames in order to play video games. I play a little golf video game all the time. My wife complains about it, by the way. And I obviously don't use my name. I created a pseudonym in order to participate there. And so the internet is full of anonymity, and it is almost designed for anonymity. It is like one of the main affordances of digital life. But this affordance is generated to be used. The anonymity of this affordance is generated to be used horizontally when we are dealing with other users. So anonymity is used widely, daily, almost constantly, digitally, horizontally. But vertically, the story is very different. In reality, vertically, just like Lucy was able to actually be anonymous to the users of her blog, she was not anonymous to the internet provider. She was not anonymous eventually to the cartels who found who she was. So vertically, anonymity is actually very hard to do, and it is in many ways quickly disappearing. So. The digital realm is unique in that way. I feel that in the digital realm, you have anonymity, horizontal anonymity everywhere, but anonymity vertically is so hard to come by.
Professor, you analyze anonymity across individuals, institutions, and different social domains. Where do you see the greatest tension today between how individuals use anonymity and how institutions manage or regulate it?
I think right now, we are at a moment where the horizontal anonymity is the asymmetry between the horizontal and the vertical. I just mentioned, horizontal anonymity, the anonymity that we do as users of the web when we are in social media, where we can be anonymous almost anytime. But vertically, to the corporations who own the platforms, to the state, we are rarely anonymous. And so I think that is the greatest tension in the digital realm, is precisely that asymmetry. The fact that we may believe that we are anonymous because we are anonymous to each other, but in reality, we are not anonymous to the state and to the corporations. That is by far, to me, the biggest tension that we live in right now. And the states are doing little to address this tension. States are happy um, expanding their ability to surveil their populations, and they are happy to pass policies that force the corporations to yield identities of users to the governments. And so this is, again, the biggest tension in contemporary life, is that because of our digital realm, states and corporations are ever more powerful, and while horizontally we use anonymity all the time.
Professor, the book engages anonymity at the levels of epistemology, what can be known, and ontology, what exists. How does taking anonymity seriously change the way we think about what a social subject is in contemporary media societies?
The findings in the area of epistemology and ontology were the most surprising findings for me. In many ways, after writing this book, I cannot think about identity in the same way I used to think about it. I came to realize that feeling anonymous was something quite common, and that most of us experience those feelings daily, and that these feelings shape our sense of self and sense of being. In fact, today I believe that it is not possible to theorize identity without attending to anonymity. That anonymity is part of our identities, and that our feelings of worth and freedom depend on our ability sometimes to experience anonymity or to use it. I think this is particularly important also to those who define themselves as subalterns. So people who live at the margins, people who are ethnic, racial, class, sexual, gender minorities, need anonymity to experience life fully. And I know it sounds ironic, but it is anonymity for them is a source of power on the one hand. On the other hand, those communities and those people are also the more likely people to feel invisible, to feel socially invisible. And that experience is like a schizophrenic experience, that anonymity is in both sides. On the one hand, is the only source of power. On the other hand, is it makes you feel invisible. It really shapes your being at the end of the day. And so, for me, theorizing the role of anonymity and ontology for me was eye-opening. Again, I didn't know I was going to be thinking in this way after finishing the book, and it really has reshaped the way I think about identity and human ontology. I think as much as important the question of who are we is the question of who we are not at any given time. So that is who we are and who we aren't. And the play of are and aren't is essential to our identities as humans and to social life.
Professor put Dr. Gloria Ansaldua and Professor Bernhard Schichers into conversation to think through anonymity. What does each of them allow you to see that standard media or communication theory might overlook? And how does their pairing reshape your account of power and identification?
Siegert is German media theories. In my discipline, we call their brand of theory, German media theory. And he was fantastic at helping me think about anonymity as a cultural technique. Um, and because of this, his work was very useful for me to think about anonymity in the social and to think about anonymity also as a way of as a play of indexes that really allowed us to alter power structures. Um, but one thing that Sager wasn't able to help me with is the way that anonymity becomes important to our identities and to our sense of self. And for that, I needed a scholar of identity. And Gloria Anzaldúa was the help in a sense. She was fantastic at opening my eyes to the way that I should be thinking about identity and the way that I should be thinking about anonymity. Her life, she grew up in the border between Mexico and the United States, and she always felt trapped in what she calls the in between spaces where she was forced to make choices between what type of self one had to present at any given time in order to be safe, to maximize her chances of survival. Um, and she had to learn to exist with multiple identities in many ways. She had to learn to relate to white USA, Texas world at the same time that she continued being a Mexican American who could relate to the brown colonized people of the border as her own. And so when I began thinking about those of us who have to live in between realms, I'm also an immigrant. I'm also Mexican American. I began to recognize then that anonymity played an important role in my daily life as a human being. Right now, I have the World Cup is happening, and soccer is all around me. It's partly happening here in LA, you know, and I live in between worlds. I live one day cheering for the USA team, one day cheering for the Mexican team, as honestly cheering as is possible for a human to experience that honesty of fandom. Obviously, this example may trivialize this living in between, but in reality, I have to switch codes all the time. Part of my life is about presenting myself to others in a certain way. Part of my life is about anonymizing part of me all the time. I have to I have to speak as a professor who works in a university here in the U.S almost all the time while hiding or anonymizing my past while not paying attention to all the history that made me who I am. In other contexts, I have to be my parents' Mexican son, for instance, and I have to forget about actually this other entity that some people call Professor Amaya, you know. And so the one who helped me see all these complexities was Gloria Anzaldúa. So for me, Anzaldúa is as important as Seeger. Seeger helped me see the social, but Anzaldúa helped me see the subject who constantly has to live in a state of partly anonymized state.
Professor describe a modernity defined by computation, where identification is increasingly automated and pervasive. In
Mhm.
such a world, where do you still see viable spaces for meaningful anonymity? And are those spaces shrinking, shifting, or being actively produced by new actors?
Yeah, I think the in a world defined by computation, anonymity becomes one of the most important questions, in my opinion. Privacy too, of course, and but we know about privacy. It seems again there are a lot of speakers about privacy, but anonymity is what is important for our social and political lives. And so when in the digital realm, we can be anonymous horizontally but not vertically, we lose a lot of our citizen rights. Um, Unsurprisingly, anonymity is valuable enough to many people in our societies, to the fact that to the point that actually there are civic organizations who put anonymity as one of the main causes to defend. And here in the U.S., the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the ACLU, and the Electronic Privacy Information Center, to name three, have anonymity as one of the core principles to defend, and they help us actually in the fight against the erasure of anonymity that corporations would like us to experience, by the way, because the corporations use our identities as currency. For them, anonymity is a loss of revenue, very literally. Their revenue structures is dependent on our identities. And so anonymity for them is the loss of revenue. Unsurprisingly, corporations will always try to do everything they can in order to erase anonymity. And states are the same. States that are interested in order will always try to actually make anonymity zero, because their chances of success as political structures depend on knowing what people are doing at any given time. Anonymity to me is super important today. It's perhaps one of the crucial questions of the moment, because in the digital realm, indeed, anonymity is going away.
Professor, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question.
Mhm.
Given the paradoxical nature of anonymity, sometimes protective, sometimes oppressive, what kind of political or ethical stance should citizens, designers, and policymakers take toward it? If you could change one dominant assumption about anonymity in public debate, what would it be?
Well, anonymity is neither good or bad. Anonymity in and of itself is neither good or is bad. It is used for good ends and for bad ends. But that doesn't mean that all instances of anonymity are equally important. Some instances of anonymity are more important than others, simply speaking. To citizens, particularly to those who live in the margins, to the subaltern, to the ethnic, racial, sexual minorities, anonymity is essential to their chances of social change and improvement. So for them, anonymity has to be defended. They have to defend it. They have to understand that they have to defend it. It is essential for their civic and political lives. To policymakers interested in democracy, I believe, well, they have to understand the same. They have to understand that in order to actually to have a valid democracy, one has to leave a space for anonymity. That it is the only way in which actually we can hear the voices of those from the margins, because those from the margins know that if actually they speak against the government will retaliate if they know who they are. Anonymity is one of the only ways of having a thriving democracy, and policymakers interested in preserving anonymity should protect it. And lastly, you asked me the question about designers, and it's a tricky one, because I know that designers are always, in contractual agreements in a sense. They are designing for others, not only for themselves. But I will challenge designers to design the world they want to live in. And my first degree is in design, by the way. And so I, 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 I was happy that you asked the question in this way because it reminded me, that one is a designer, one has choices to make the designs reflect the world that one wants to live in, not simply the clients. The clients, well, one negotiates with the clients and one negotiates with the bosses, but definitely the designer ought to see design as a type of social action and social activity. Doesn't mean that you have to be an activist with design all the time, but when it's possible, remember what kind of world you want to live in and design it.
Thank you, Professor Hector Amaya, for taking us inside the economy of anonymity and helping us to see how anonymity shapes power, freedom, and vulnerability in our everyday lives. Your work gives us a new vocabulary to think about how we move through digital systems, urban spaces, and political struggles in the age of identification. For our listeners who want to go deeper, we will link to the book and related resources in the show notes. Thank you, Professor Amaya, for joining us today. It has been a truly privilege to learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepak, and thank you for the wonderful questions, by the way. They were superb, and thank you to your listeners for your patience.